Hey there team, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the Kindeman Remedy. This is the game that we're going to review today. Now, you've probably seen it in the thumbnail or the title. I'm not going to be clickbaity or anything, but I'll just put it at the front. This is a negative review. This game I do not recommend for time or for money. It makes me a bit sad, to be honest, because I don't really want to be negative. This is more of an unpleasant part of the job, if anything. Personally, I'm not really a big fan of channels that just simp for a franchise no matter what. You know, these cheerleaders that can see no fault. That doesn't really add much value to any conversation, I find. But at the same time, you've got the opposite side of the coin. You've got a whole bunch of channels and their entire business model is negative clickbait and beating the shit out of games and sucking the fun and life out of everything. So I'm going to try and be measured, but, you know, recognize that I don't necessarily want to be negative. I kind of just want to be honest. As far as objective constraints go, the only real one that we have is that if I give the game $5, then I expect it to give me an hour of good, clean fun. Now that hasn't really happened here, and that's going to bear discussion. So this game is $11.79 Australian, and by my math, it's about 2.5 hours of gameplay that I ask of it. And so, riddle me this, Batman. If a game's got 20 hours of gameplay in it and it's asking for a price tag of 10, but the gameplay loop there's something wrong with it. It's, you know, at best bloated, but at worst kind of unpleasant, broken, not fun to play. Does that make it worth your money? Because it's definitely not worth your time. It's an interesting discussion because there are other things on the other side of it. I'm actually playing a game at the moment for review also. It's a really, really good experience, but it feels like it's overpriced. So probably worth your time, but not worth your money. So there's sort of two sides of the coin, but I feel like if the loop isn't pleasant, whether it's 1 hour or 100 hours, that probably disqualifies it full stop. Just something to have rolling around in the back of your head so you can make your own judgment as well. But anyway, I put my hours into it and I just found it kind of unpleasant and messy. It's probably worth discussing where this game's drawing its inspiration from, which from what I understand is Ravenous Devils, which is a bit of a one-of-a-kind original game. Takes that ant farm management that you see in like This War of Mine or XCOM base management, that sort of thing. You'll see it in the footage. And it turned it into this very tight, clean, distilled daily management thing of cooking people up and putting them into pies and repurposing their food into a tailor shop. You had two different, like a husband and wife business running that, and it keeps you busy and engaged, flipping between them and trying to be efficient. Tail that with a cool setting and a cool story and a price tag cheaper than this as well. That was really brilliant, and I've been looking forward to something that does the same thing because it was inevitable that you would get copycats or inspiration or whatever you would call it. So I was kind of excited to check out the Kindeman Remedy. However, in so many ways, it really does fall flat. You know, the biggest crime is being tedious, obtuse, and inconsistent. Let's just step back a bit and I'll give you the setting. The idea is that in the same thing, you're running a two-person kind of shop, kind of front of house, but the setting is in a prison. You've got the main character dude is kind of this mad scientist, Frankensteinian guy that wants to experiment on people. And so he's got his whole lab component in the bottom half of the management wing. And at the top, you've got a fairly one-dimensional nun/nurse type character who's just, you know, psychopathic and is happy to poison and kill all these people. At first blush, I thought it would be interesting balancing the idea of having to treat people and also kill them and balance the scales. That seems interesting, but the reputation system is just a currency and you lose as much reputation for letting a dude walk out of line and not get treated as you do for killing him. So that's a bit odd. The game really bends over backwards to try and make its theme make sense, and it doesn't, and it has some glaring problems. Alright, so take this for example. As I understand it, this main character has come up with a pseudoscience idea. He can repurpose the chemicals in a human body and experiment with its remedial characteristics or properties. So you've got that sort of tale as old as time, this dude that for the best of intentions is doing the worst things. And so from this, he needs a mix of cadavers, of people that he can extract the juices from to make his serum, but then he also needs live patients that he can mess with as well, right? And this is how the concept plays out. Basically, he brews up pills or IV drips or just general treatment that gets dumb-weighted upstairs, again, taken directly from ravenous devils. Kind of made sense to have a dumbwaiter because it was a restaurant, but whatever. We're just going to take that whole mechanic, whole cloth. I'm not that worried about it, but it gives you an idea. You know, some of these inconsistencies start creeping in. So you basically dumbwaiter up these pills, and the nurse can poison some of them, and that will kill a dude, and he'll be taken away off screen and put in the corpse pile. And that's how you get the dead bodies. To get the live bodies, there are executions every couple of days, and he has to inject this serum, which, for whatever reason, it MacGuffins its way to making someone seem dead. He has to rig the medical pre-inspection for the electrocution so that they get that injected, and then when they get electrocuted, he has to organise with the dude pulling the trigger to lower the voltage so that they can fake the death, and he can declare them dead even though they do still have a heartbeat, and he ends up with them alive downstairs. Does that sound convoluted to you? Good, because it bloody well is. And the first thing that you probably will start to think is, well, why aren't you just using this remedy or fake sedation or fake death MacGuffin on the normal pill dudes upstairs? And then now you've got corpses and live people addressed. Why do you have this whole execution thing? And that's the point. Of course there's a why, because it's dumb. It's so contrived, it doesn't make sense. And because it actually doesn't make sense mechanically, I found myself missing a lot of the cues that the game introduces you in cutscenes, but not with actual hands-on mechanics. So I'd accidentally miss a pre-medical inspection because it didn't occur to me in the middle of all my pill prepping to go and do that. And then there's other points where during the night you have to ring up the dude to organise to get the body delivered, and I'd forget to do that because that's not really obvious either. So yeah, it's an absolute mess, and it doesn't make sense narratively, and mechanically it falls over because it doesn't make sense either. It's not intuitive. Then, of course, you have the busy work of mixing the pills and putting them up and down. And another thing it doesn't seem to understand, and I'm going to have to keep comparing it to Ravenous Devils, but it sort of goes the same with any sort of serving game like Plate Up or something like that, right? Generally speaking, you will have X customers or whatever coming through. Let's say it was 10 in a day, and the objective is to nail all 10, right? With great penalty. This game seems pretty happy with just sending a shitload of dudes at you, that from what I can understand, it's kind of impossible to attend to them all straight out of the gate. And this is going to miff people really bad. You should be squeezed to the point where maybe you miss one or two, but I'm pretty certain that it almost has an infinite amount of guys that just keep rolling in until the day winds out. So there's a question of balance not being there, being off at the best, but non-existent is much more likely. And just while I'm piling on this sort of stuff, there is a split part. You go into the night, you do the experiments on bodies downstairs, which is incredibly tedious. You just get bottlenecked by doing one thing at a time, and if you do click on something that's not ready to go, you get a pop-up on the screen that you have to cancel out of with right click instead of left click, and they introduce a queue system, which is wild, because if you try and queue up something that the guy won't physically be able to do, it can queue up, so that'll be third in the queue. Maybe the dumb waiter's clogged up because the nun hasn't gotten around to emptying it, but it won't warn you of that. And then if it does, the dude just stops dead and stands still. A lot of the time, the guy can carry two things in his hands, but it's not really super apparent. It is down on the very bottom of the UI, super small, but it would allow me to go to an inspection, a pre-medical, pre-execution inspection to inject the dude, but my guy had a bag of drips in his hand, and by the time I'd gotten there and realised that the game sort of let me do that, there's nowhere to put it, so I had to send him back up to the lab to put it in the dumbwaiter, which was full, so she had to clear the dumbwaiter and put that in. And by the time I got back, I've missed out the opportunity, and that only happens once every 2 days. So I think you're starting to get the idea. It's tedious, it's inconsistent, it is unpleasant to play, especially when you compare it to where it draws inspiration from. And if I were to try and put my finger on a specific thing, because there's obviously passion going on here. I don't think the devs mean ill will or anything like that, but I think they've attempted to make the game more complex than the Ravenous Devil's inspiration, with things like the 3-step queue system that you can do, but it doesn't work. The reason Ravenous Devils works in its simplicity is that it is clean, it is tight. They probably spent a lot of time getting that gameplay loop right. And, I don't want to speak for them, but they probably workshopped more complex mechanics and then chose less because it seems apparent. It's not simple because it's a crap game, it's simple because it's considered. Whereas this feels like, well, the organic next step is to jam more mechanics in, and they haven't really considered whether it's fun to play, and it is not. Before it gets away from me, another thing, like when you're downstairs, anyone that you torture and kill, and we're going to get to that, you throw those bodies out the ocean over a railing, but the guys that you drain of their juices, you put them in a different dead pile, and if you try and switch and do it, the game bricks out and says, no, you can't do that. So there's 2 different dead spots for 2 different types of dead bodies, and it's never explained. It doesn't make sense. What would make sense is them all going to the same place, but they don't. And it's kind of wild to me that the ones that sort of have a bit of an autopsy type cut up go on, they're the ones that get thrown out to sea to disappear, no questions asked. The ones that get all their shit drained out of them, weird stuff going on, they're the ones that go in the more normal disposal. What are you doing, game? Now, there's a glimmer of something special in there, in that the first dude, because there's narrative components, the first dude that you really cut up and experiment on, it's not so much that it's graphic, but it's morbid and explicit. It's actually really grim, which props to the game, I suppose, but let's not backpat just yet. Let me finish my point. But you end up cutting this dude's arms and legs off, then you remove his stomach while he's still alive, and they show it all happening. And while it's, indie graphics, it is grisly. That's what I think. Explicit is the best word for it. And this dude nearly dies, and then they resuscitate him, and they hang him on the wall as part of this experiment. We're getting into that sort of, Herbert bloody reanimator type sort of thing. And I thought, oh, this is kind of awful, but interesting, like good for them shooting their shot. Then I realized that I've actually, it's either I've misread it or the game has accidentally done something almost brilliant when they were attempting dark humor, because from there on, this dude becomes a thing you click on the wall and just drops memes about bloody Katy Perry lyrics from the future and all this sort of crap. So then you start to realize, oh, you weren't going for that. You're trying to do dark comedy. You just almost accidentally did something kind of brilliant and really edgy. So yeah, that was a little bit disappointing, where for a moment there, and that's part of what kind of kept me going. I was like, maybe there's something really grim and interesting in there. Not that I'm not actually really into that sort of visceral horror type stuff, but I thought, oh, this is interesting. You don't see this every day. But yeah, no, it turns out we're just going to hang this guy on the wall and he's going to make really crap dad jokes. So for my part, I would say, sure, it's got the gameplay hours in there. So you could play it if you're really desperate to try out something different. Like if you haven't seen the game I keep mentioning, Ravenous Devils, you might look at this and go, oh, this is really unusual. I've never seen anything like this before, right? So you may get value from it like that, but I just found so much of it kind of tedious and bloated. A lot of the animation cycles that you end up sitting there looking at them, they're uninteresting. Whereas, again, the Ravenous Devils example, there were longer form interesting animations that you could watch once or twice. And that game was doing grisly dark humor, but it nailed it, of like mangling body parts into a, jamming it in there, poking it with a stick, that sort of thing. But you're not going to watch that animation 10,000 times. You're going to watch it once and go, oh, that's kind of cool. And then what you're going to do is min-max so that you don't sit on that screen for more than a split second while you try and jump back and forth. I'm using my hands between that dude and the chick upstairs and trying to balance the workflow, right? There's actually a lot of nuance between that sort of trying to plate spin between two different dudes that can be locked into busy animations. And that game nailed it. This game just simply does not. I don't know how else to best describe it. But as you can see, so much of the pacing, rhythm, theme, mechanics is just off. Anyway, clearly I don't recommend it, and I think it's an issue with the core loop, less so than the price point. So even if it was on special, I wouldn't recommend it either. And, you know, if the devs ever heard this and wanted to patch it, I don't think you could patch it. I think there are fundamental problems in the DNA of this game. I feel like I've gone hard on it. I haven't tried to, and I hope it doesn't come across like that in my video. I've just tried to explain that there are problems and give examples as to why they are problems. At the end of the day, I still recognize that there's probably a lot of passion went into this. There are people behind this. There's probably money behind it as well. It was published by 3D Realms, which is a interesting decision, and I kind of wonder what they're doing here. Maybe they're trying to just turn into yet another indie publishing house, which we're kind of getting flooded with these days. Anywho, let me know what you reckon. Again, this is the first that I've really been negative about a game and simply just not recommended. There will be more in the future, I'm sure, but I don't necessarily want that to be my business model. I'd be willing to hear people's counterpoints or feedback around the topic, but other than that, I don't want to waffle longer than I already have. Team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I will catch you guys on the next one.